We've told you a lot on this show over the past few years about how Google, Facebook, and Twitter work in secret to impose a left-wing political agenda on this country. In 2016, for example, Google employees worked behind the scenes to boost Hillary Clinton's voter turnout. They seemed despondent when they couldn't stop Donald Trump from winning. Google, as you well know, regularly suppresses conservative videos on YouTube. At one point, the company even contemplated rigging its search results to undermine Trump's immigration policy. Twitter, meanwhile, and you know this well, often bans users entirely for the crime of disagreeing with the left. At this point, it is very clear that big tech hates conservatives and works assiduously to harm them. Republican voters are starting to figure this out. A Harris poll from last year found that 83% of Republicans understand that tech is biased against conservatives. Another poll this summer found that 42% of all voters, not just conservatives, believe the Trump administration should take action to push back against the tech monopoly's political bias. And yet, so far, that's not happening. No one in Washington is doing anything to rein these companies in. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are a lot of things you could do if you wanted to. For example, tech companies have thrived under a special immunity they receive from Congress that protects them from lawsuits over what people say on their platform. It's an exemption that Fox News, for example, does not have. So why does Google have it? Senator Josh Hawley would like to know the answer. Hawley has proposed stripping that immunity from tech companies and treating them like everyone else unless they can maintain neutral platforms for all views, which, of course, was the original deal they struck. That's a great idea, but it hasn't happened. Another idea is breaking up major tech companies so that a handful of monopolies don't have effective veto power over the First Amendment, which is where we are today. It's another great idea, but again, it hasn't happened. Why all the inaction on these questions? Well, a big part of the problem is that conservative nonprofits here in Washington, the ones that are supposed to be looking out for you, aren't actually looking out for you. They're looking out for big tech. A new report from the Campaign for Accountability obtained by this show highlights how conservative organizations in D.C. have colluded with big tech to shield left-wing monopolies from any oversight at all. It's an amazing story, and it's happening now. This October, for example, Americans for Prosperity, that's a purportedly conservative group controlled by the billionaire Koch families, launched an ad supporting Facebook and Google. Again, not attacking, supporting Facebook and Google. The ads they ran targeted state attorneys general, Republican and Democrat, who were leading antitrust investigations into those two companies. In March, Americans for Prosperity ran digital ads urging members of the Senate Judiciary Committee to, quote, oppose any effort to use antitrust laws to break up America's innovative tech companies, end quote. In all, the Koch network quietly spent at least $10 million defending Silicon Valley companies that work to silence conservatives. The richest companies in the world being defended by a conservative nonprofit as they attack conservatives. Why are they doing this? Well, as one former Koch employee recently told this show off the record, quote, I know for a fact they take money from social media companies to do their bidding, end quote. And it turns out he was right. Google has given money to at least 22 right-leaning institutions that are also funded by the Koch network. Those institutions include the American Conservative Union, the American Enterprise Institute, the National Review Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, and the Mercatus Center. We could go on. Google, for example, was the single largest donor to the Competitive Enterprise Institute's annual dinner a few years back. So what does all this money buy exactly? You know the answer. In September of 2018, the Competitive Enterprise Institute and 3 other groups that had been funded by Google and the Kochs sent a joint letter to the Attorney General at the time, Jeff Sessions, expressing grave concerns over DOJ's plan to look into whether search engines and social media were hurting competition and stifling speech. Here's how it works. Big tech companies silence conservatives. Conservatives, nonprofits try to prevent the government from doing anything about it. Makes sense. And then there's the Heritage Foundation, maybe the biggest and best funded think tank in Washington. Half the conservatives in this city seem to have worked there at one time or another. Almost 30 years ago, I did, for example. To this day, there are a lot of nice and very well-meaning people at Heritage. But as an organization, Heritage no longer represents the interests of conservatives, at least on the question of tech. A recent paper by Heritage entitled "Free Enterprise is the Best Remedy for Online Bias Concerns" defends the special privileges that Congress has given to left-wing Silicon Valley monopolies. And if conservatives don't like it, Heritage says, well, they can just start their own Google. The paper could have been written by tech lobbyists. In fact, it may have been written by tech lobbyists. A trade association that represents Silicon Valley called the liability exemption that Google enjoys, quote, the most important law in tech. Well, Heritage's paper repeats that line verbatim, word for word, along with many other lines that the lobbyists wrote. It's embarrassing. But Heritage isn't embarrassed. None of the so-called conservative nonprofits in Washington are embarrassed. They make deals with people who hate you. They secretly sell out your interests. Then they beg you to tithe like it's the medieval church, like you owe them your money. That's a system that we've had for decades. And maybe that's why, no matter how much money you send, nothing gets more conservative, just the opposite. You wonder how much longer this system can continue.